Good evening, and thank you so much for tuning in to yet another episode of NewsMaker Live with Laura. If it's Wednesday, it's NewsMaker Live, where we make your stories our stories. Tonight, it's going to be a good one. So I'm going to try to be brief and quick through the trending items, and we're going to get right into my guests. So, me of all persons, I would know what it's like to be impersonated, and it's not a good feeling. Sometime last year, I had a situation where somebody impersonated me on Facebook and put out things out there that I never said, never did, never wrote. And it's quite disconcerting to have ascribed to you things that you never said, never did, never wrote. So I was one of the first persons to be quite sympathetic with the Prime Minister when I heard that he was being impersonated on Facebook. Nonetheless, I mean, social media, he's gone viral and, you know, having things said allegedly about him that he never said or never wrote or never did. So my heart goes out to the Prime Minister, because that's no fun. And you have to go through such lengths to get rid of it. But what's out there in the public domain is already there. So I feel sorry for the Prime Minister in that regard. But however, he cannot escape the fact that he said that in our schools, we have the most, and I'm paraphrasing, master's degrees and bachelor's degrees and doctorate of this and doctorate of that. Yet still, there's a dearth of leadership in our schools. And in one of the fora that I belong to this week, this became an item of immense debate. Why is it that we have leaderless schools, or where there's a dearth of leadership in our schools? Well, it's symptomatic, as far as I'm concerned, of our society, the communities that we grew up in or that we come out of. There is a dearth of leadership in our country, in our communities, not just our schools. After all, the principals and teachers in our schools come out of our communities, don't they? Just like the politicians, they come out of our communities. They've been schooled in our schools for the most part, at least in their formative years, and they're a product of our communities. Basically, I believe it is because we have a system that is so focused on certification and not necessarily qualification. And a lot of us make the mistake of thinking that once you have the certification, you have a piece of paper saying that you hold a certificate or you qualified in a certain area, that we think that we're qualified. But qualification is so much more than just certification. And we put so much emphasis on certification and not necessarily qualification that we end up rushing the brush, like the Trinis would say, and going straight for the certification and not necessarily spending time on the qualification. I have met people who are A students who've come out with distinctions at the CXC level, at the A levels, at university level, distinctions, but yet they cannot apply what they've supposedly learned or what they should have learned into practice. And that is because they've chased the certification and not the qualification. So this is my simple, basic reason, and there's so much more. And I promised my group of friends that I would have a show dedicated to just that. Certification versus qualification. What makes a person qualified for a position? And just last week I spoke about an issue where a certain person had asked about the qualification of a certain other person. And of course, we all jumped to certification and not necessarily qualification. So of course, I made that promise and I try to keep my promises. So we're going to have a show where we talk about certification versus qualification. Certification does not necessarily make you qualified in a particular area. It does not necessarily make you a guru in a certain area. It certainly does not make you a leader. And then there's so much more we can go into, leadership versus management and that kind of thing. So I promise we're going to have an entire show just on that. Certification versus qualification. What makes a good leader? It certainly isn't just the certification. Now, sometime last week, I believe it was, questions were being asked about the past press secretary's position as communications director for the St. Lucia Labour Party. And the question was asked, how is it that the St. Lucia Labour Party is able to pay her salary, and that it had to be a step down for her to leave being a press secretary, a substantive office commanding a substantive pay, to become in effect a glorified PRO for the St. Lucia Labour Party. And the reasoning was that it had to be economical. It had to be that she was getting far more than what she got as press secretary. And the chairman of the St. Lucia Labour Party came out in defense of that. And at least for me, he alluded or gave the impression that it was for service and not necessarily for economic gain. You know, he said something about everything is not necessarily for economic gain. And again, I'm paraphrasing, and that, you know, the St. Lucia Labour Party has always been about service, and that was what it was for the press secretary. Fast forward a week or maybe a few days even, and here's the Prime Minister saying that the salary of the former press secretary is being footed by the private sector. And I had to pause and say, what? Excuse me? Say what? It was being funded by the private sector. Is that the same private sector where businesses are shutting down? Is that the same private sector where people are complaining that they can't get jobs? Is that the same private sector that people are just generally saying is not buoyant? Did I miss something? Oh, but private sector does not necessarily mean the local private sector, does it? It could be regional or it could be international, right? I just need clarification because I'm very confused. On the one hand, we're saying it's service above self and not necessarily for economic gain, which doesn't make a lot of sense because this is a woman who is married, who has a daughter, who is going to need even more economic support as she gets older because, you know, where she is at in her life, education-wise and otherwise. So it doesn't make any sense to me that she would move from maybe an $8,000 job to a $3,000 job, or even a $5,000 job. $3,000 difference in salary is a huge thing. I don't know, maybe it's just me being business-minded and always looking at the bottom line, but that just doesn't make any sense. Service before self. So now when we talk about the private sector footing her salary, I just don't get it because I know locally as a member of this private sector, that ain't flying. That ain't flying. So the left hand of the St. Lucia Labour Party does not know what the right hand is doing. Certainly the two mouthpieces do not know what each other is saying because those two excuses or explanations don't fly. I'm sorry. Now, speaking of things not making sense, are you guys as baffled as I am as to the statements being made by our Justice Minister? I mean, last week, Rick said something. I'm referring to Rick Wayne, by the way, in case you didn't know, that he has got to be stark raving mad. And again, I'm paraphrasing. He's got to be. First, he's talking about contemplating raising the criminal responsible age, or rather, it's actually dropping the criminal responsible age. And I thought that was criminally irresponsible because we first have to find out why kids do the things that they do. Why is it that a 16-year-old female has found herself in a situation where she's being accused of murdering a 53 or 57-year-old man? We have to find out what is affecting our children before we can make blanket statements that are going to affect them. I mean, remember, we signed treaties. We signed treaties, international treaties, saying that we're going to honor this and we're going to honor that, and we're expecting the international community to support us, but we make statements contrary to some of the treaties that we have signed. It doesn't make any sense. Now this week, we're hearing that the Minister of Justice is saying that the reasons we cannot patrol our borders is because we don't have requisite machinery or equipment to determine when guns come into this country. Are you serious, Mr. Minister? Are you serious? Did you hear yourself while you were saying that? Did that resonate with you? Did you go, oops, I made a mistake? I mean, seriously, this is what you are there for. Policies, to put in place the policies to help us patrol our borders, to help us keep our citizens safe and visitors to our shores safe. And yet you're making this big indictment on our forces, our armed forces, our security forces. I mean, seriously. And then we complain that it is us, the citizens, that are painting our country in a bad light. That makes no sense to me. Absolute bonkers, cuckoo, you name it, it makes no sense. I think our Prime Minister has a way of gagging his ministers. This is one time he should invoke a gag order on this minister. Censure. Zip it. If you can't think about the things that you're going to say about how it is going to affect us, don't say it. Don't say it. Put a muzzle on it. Now, I'm coming to the lighter side of things. I mean, I just think this is so funny. I think it's funny. So tonight I learned something. I learned that Spider is 53 years old. That's Leonard Spider Montoot. He's 53 years old. And that Guy Mayers, who is the chairman of the United Workers' Party, is 58 years old, which makes him approximately about 5 years older than Spider. And that Granny Emma, Honorable Emma Hippolyte, is about 63 years old, which makes her approximately 10 years older than Spider and 5 years older than Guy Mayers. And this is what has me so tickled. On the weekend, there was this public meeting of the United Workers' Party, and the Honorable, I was about to say Granny again, the Honorable Emma Hippolyte was referred to as a granny, not just by the chairman of the United Workers' Party, Guy Mayers, but also by my dear friend, Spider Montoot. And here's the thing. Who would have thought that the minister, the Honorable Minister, was only 10 years senior to Spider, or only 5 years senior to Guy Mayers? But that's not just it. That's not where it's at. That's not what has me so tickled. What has me so tickled is her comeback to the granny retort. And I'm telling you guys, Emma Hippolyte has won 10-0 over these guys. You know what she said to this? You know what her response was to the granny retort? She's gonna put Spider over her knees and make him holla. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember there was this song, Granny, stop hollering out my name. That is what came to mind, and I just laughed all the way to the studio from the time I heard Emma say that she's going to give Spider a spanking where it counts. I mean, Spider, you know, you had the granny giving you a real lesson tonight. Stay tuned. When we come back from the break, my guests.
Granny no miserable. If you live with your granny, you will turn granny too. Who say granny no love the cussing? Feel me granny, she cuss me everything. Granny, stop hollering out my name. Granny, you calling me name in vain. Granny, where you are call me for? Me soon left you and go live with mama. Imagine.